We got to pack the bag to get ready to go to the woods. Who's ready to go to the woods? Gonna go for a ride in the car. Yes, we are. What's up, YouTube? It's No More Op 4 out in the woods today with my partner in crime, Gemma the sheepdog. Went for a ride in the car and we're in the woods, huh? She knows too many words for her own good, but today we're out here to kind of show you what Fatwood is and how to find it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of show you the process of how I found Fatwood, because I had a pretty difficult time finding it. Now, I live in the northeastern United States, and these are northeastern woods right now. It's a mix of pine and deciduous, but there wasn't a lot of good videos on YouTube or a lot of good information on forums for finding it in the Northeast, because in other parts of the country, Fatwood is everywhere. But unfortunately, up here in the Northeast, at least in my experience, it's not as easy to come by. So I'm going to kind of walk you through the process, how I figured out how to find Fatwood. So I first heard about Fatwood a couple years ago, and I've actually seen it in stores too, in like Walmart and things like that. Essentially what Fatwood is, it's a wood from a pine tree that is concentrated with the resin of the pine tree, which is called terpene. And terpene is what turpentine is derived from, which is obviously very flammable. So these pieces of Fatwood are also very flammable. You can use them for fire starting. You can make little shavings that will take a spark from a firesteel very easily. And it's just a good bushcraft item to know how to use and know how to find and utilize. So the first place that I looked for Fatwood, based on the advice of most of the information I found online, was checking pine tree stumps. And I gotta tell you, I was very unsuccessful. I don't know if it's just the type of woods that I have around here. Perhaps it's the soil quality, or maybe it's just the fact that the ground is really damp around here. I'm not sure. But the problem I had was when I would dig up these stumps and I'd pull these pieces out, they'd either be completely dry like this, or they'd be totally wet like this piece here, or they would just be completely rotted like this piece here. Now, early in my search for Fatwood, when I would find pieces like this that were just really damp, they kind of fooled me for Fatwood, and I took a lot of these pieces home, only to find that when I let them sit out and dry a little bit, they weren't actually Fatwood, but the wetness, the dampness of the ground caused the wood to take on a bit of a red hue that made it appear as Fatwood. What are you doing, huh? You looking for Fatwood? Did you find any? So at this point I was getting very frustrated with the stump searching, and I was doing some more research trying to figure out other methods for how I could possibly collect Fatwood. And in that research I found out that another good source for Fatwood is actually the first couple inches connecting a dead broken branch, or if it's managed not to fall off yet, a dead branch that's still connected to a live tree. Now, my thought process is here, similarly to how the pine tree will use its sap to kind of cover up an injury, which by the way is also a good indicator of there being Fatwood. When a branch dies, the tree will pump resin to that branch, and at the base of the branch where it connects to the trunk of the tree, you'll have concentrated Fatwood, which is exactly what you have on this piece right here. The sun's in the way. Let me see if I can block that for you. But that's a great piece of Fatwood. Now, the only drawback here is that you only have a few inches of Fatwood, but you can still collect these pieces, take them home, and get some good shavings out of them. Don't give up entirely on stumps, because another good place to search is not the actual stump, but the fallen tree that used to be connected to the stump. Now, I kind of hacked this one apart with my axe, but this is a really good piece of Fatwood as well. A saw is probably going to be your best method for collecting Fatwood in this capacity anyway when you're going for branches. Now the fatwood will actually be concentrated down into the trunk of the tree a bit, but it's going to be very difficult to get, and it's going to be pretty hard to get shavings off of that as well because it's going to be knotted. Generally, it's been my experience that the thicker the branch, the better. Obviously, more resin will be able to go in, but it also depends on how long that branch has been dead. You can see here, this piece that I just gathered actually was off of a fallen tree, but down to about where my thumb is fatwood. You can see the inside. This is also fatwood because the tree, again, as I said, seals off the dead branch. Now, if you live in the Northeast like I do, I don't want you to give up entirely on the stumps because they can still yield some good pieces. Like that right there is actually an excellent piece. Let me cover it a little bit so you can see. Now this is good fatwood, but you can see here that that's not. That's just regular wet pine tree. It's just, in my experience, easier to collect fatwood from the end stumps of an older part of woods and just collecting those and making shavings. It's funny because I actually had given up on checking stumps when I went to a new section of woods that was a little bit younger than this. And it was funny because the branches were so young, they were still connected to the tree. The tree hadn't had time to pump enough resin in for it to be viable fatwood. So it kind of threw me for a loop. And then what ended up happening, just when I went out there to say, don't waste your time on stumps, I found a good stump piece that was actually part of a root system. So it just goes to show you, don't ever give up, just keep looking and you'll find good pieces. So I've shown you the basics on how I collected my fatwood and kind of the learning curve I progressed to figure out how to find it. So now I'm going to go home and show you some pieces that I've collected and what I've done with those. Time to go in the car, Jim. What do you got? Hey! What do you have? Let's see it. You got a piece of fatwood. Good job. Good girl. Get it. Get it. So, back in the lab, had a chance to just kind of review all of the video I did earlier to make sure I covered everything. And what I'm going to do right now is I'm actually going to play clips from the time before last when I was out. And at this point in time, I had pretty much given up on finding stumps with fatwood, and it just so happens that I spoke a little bit too soon and I found a good stump. So let me show you those really quick. So I actually came out today to show you how to find fatwood through dead limbs on living pine trees because I had had such a hard time finding any stumps that were fatwood. And I guess I spoke too soon because look at this baby. It's the fatwood, and this is actually part of the root system of the pine tree. This is where the resin is pumped from to the rest of the tree. But yeah, this is a good piece. I need to get my saw out for this one. This is honestly, this is the first stump that I've ever found. The only way I've really managed to find this in the past couple of weeks that I've been looking for it was through the ends of broken branches where they connect back to the trunk of the tree. But persistence always pays off, and I got this good piece here. So I'm going to clean this up a little bit, saw it, see if I can find any other good pieces on this dead tree. Now there are still some dead pieces that I will need to clean off of this piece, but this is a very nice stick. It's gonna probably have a pretty decent amount of fatwood. Even once I clean off this dead area here, all this in there is good solid fatwood. You can smell it too. The smell smells just like turpentine. There is a little bit more. I'm going to see if I can salvage some of this. A lot of it is probably buried underneath the ground, and this is a pretty big tree, so we'll see what we can get. So that just goes to show you, don't give up in the hunt for finding stumps. They are out there, you just have to look a little bit harder in the Northeast. But what I'm going to show you now is kind of my pine tree box of goodies. I've got a whole container filled with all sorts of stuff, and instantly upon opening this box, the smell of the turpentine is released. So let's take a look at what I've got in here. Okay, so I've got my little bag of tricks pulled out here. Now this bag, and I'll inlay pictures throughout this, but this bag is filled entirely with all quality pieces of Fatwood. I'm going to show you probably my most concentrated piece right here. You can see those hues in the wood. This is what separates a true piece of Fatwood from one of the, as I've come to call them, the fool's Fatwood, similar to fool's gold. Looks like it, but you get it home only to find out it's not actually a piece of Fatwood. But this darker color in here, this is an awesome piece to make shavings from. Now, one of the reasons I have these in a bag is because in my excitement the first time that I went out and gathered Fatwood, I came home and I shaved off all of the outer bark pieces on the wood. The only problem with that is the Fatwood, in my experience and from experience that I've heard from others, is that the Fatwood pieces will dry out and they can lose their flammability. So to counter that, what I do is I keep them in Ziploc bags so they maintain that the flammability and the quality of the Fatwood stays inside the piece of wood. And you open that bag and it instantly smells like a turpentine factory. One of the other areas I did want to cover, when you're out looking for Fatwood, another thing to keep your eye open for is sap from a tree. Now, for a couple reasons. Sap by itself is very useful. You can use it to make torches, you can use it to make glue. It's got a lot of different applications. And I've got 3 different types of sap here. So I've got sap that I collected, actually it was already hardened. This is pure sap. There really isn't a lot of other pieces of wood or debris in there. That's the perfect kind of piece for boiling down to make a torch or something like that. Then there are pieces like this, which at the time I collected them were still very wet, and it actually still is a little bit wet, but I've let it dry for a couple weeks. It's turned out to be a lot better of a piece. This, still good use for making glue and torches and things like that, but you've got to let it dry, and then once it does, you've got to clean off some of the debris and dirt that's in there. And then finally, this is probably the worst type. This, has a lot of dirt and debris that's also collected inside. You'd have to boil this off. I may do that in another video just to show you. So the reason that I wanted to show you the sap is because when you see one, the other is likely very close. So we already covered earlier that on a dead branch, the tree will pump the terpene into that end of the branch, and that will cause it essentially to become hardened and safe from the rest of the tree, and that's what creates the Fatwood. Now, externally, when a tree is injured, it creates the sap, and when you can find big injuries on a tree where a lot of sap has been produced, it's probably pretty likely, as I'll inlay in a picture, that you can also find a large area of Fatwood because the tree pumps the sap and the terpene to that area to seal off the injury. So you want to keep your eye open for sap, because when you see sap, Fatwood is likely available in large quantities as well. So I talked in the woods about sometimes being tricked by damp wood, thinking that it's actually a piece of Fatwood, when in reality it's just damp wood. One of the ways to kind of figure out when you're actually out in the woods whether or not it is real is to scrape part of it. If you can get it to scrape against your fingernail or against the knife, and you can see the resin kind of leave a mark, you know you found a good piece of fatwood. When searching, you also want to, and you'll get a feel for this as you go out and search, but you want to avoid the pieces of wood that are visibly moldy and they're green on the outside. When you collect pieces like this and you take them home, if you've got a lot, it's okay, but leave the bark on because the bark will protect the inner layer of fatwood, so it will have a longer life. As I mentioned earlier, I kind of got a little trigger happy and I shaved off a lot of the pieces. I just wanted to make sure that I found it. I was so elated that I actually found it that I went ahead and I cut all of these pieces. I cut all the wood off, but putting them in the bag, it should maintain a good long-lasting life for the fatwood, but likely I'll use it before it would ever dry out. So lastly, I just want to give you a rundown of things to keep in mind when you're out hunting for your own fatwood. So, first thing that we mentioned, you want to keep your eye open for pieces of sap, hardened sap on trees, any injuries, because that will mean, one, you can collect the sap, but two, that wood that is injured also probably has a higher content of terpene, which will lead to some good fatwood pockets. If you're not sure if it's fatwood, you want to try to do the scrape test with your thumbnail or a knife, just to check to see if you can scrape some of the resin off and visibly tell whether or not it's fatwood. Age of the woods. You want to go to a stand of pine that is older. The newer the tree, the smaller the branches will be at the bottom, also meaning that they've probably only recently died if they are dead, which means less time for the tree to seal that off with the terpene and cause that concentration of fatwood where the branch meets the trunk of the tree. Fool's fatwood, you want to try to stay away from some of the more moist and damp areas. That can, a lot of times, as it happened to me, lead you to fool's fatwood. The fatter the pieces, the better. Again, that also signifies that the tree is older, but it will also lead you to finding more usable fatwood when you actually harvest some. And last but not least, the scent test. If it only smells lightly of pine tree, it's not fatwood. This is an unmistakable smell, and if you're not sure, it's not really fatwood. Trust me guys, when you find it, you will know. This stuff has a very strong odor. I love it, but that's just me. Some people think it's gross, but you will know when you find fatwood. If you're not sure, you haven't found it yet. So from this point, I've showed you my trials and tribulations as I learned basically how to go out and identify good pieces of fatwood. I've given you some tips that I came up with to how to easily identify it when you're out on your own. And I've just showed you how I've stored it and some tips on how to process it. In a separate video, I'm going to show the uses of fatwood along with cattails because they are an awesome fire starting combination for a wilderness situation. But that's going to be in a separate video. This one's already kind of run a little bit longer than I liked. But that's it for me, guys. I hope this video has been helpful. I know there wasn't a lot of other good videos on the internet, but hopefully this should get you started and on your way to finding fatwood. Remember, don't get disappointed. Keep looking. You will find it. It's out there. As always, guys, this is No More Op 4. Stay safe. I'm out.